All right, GM, welcome. We've got a panel full of builders here. We've got some of the best in the modular space. GM Robbie Rollup, repping the Rollup. How you doing, buddy?
Dude, it's always good to just think with people. I love learning with people in the space, and when we can collectively put our minds together and come up with something that's great, bigger, and brighter. I feel like I learn a lot and benefit a lot, and I hope everyone here and everyone who's watching does as well. So yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces, and I'm stoked to get into it. This is a new format for us. We're not a Twitter space anymore. We're expanding. We're branching into new horizons, so it feels good. We want to start off with a round of intros.
Let's do it. Let's start with C-Node, and then we'll go to Veronica, then David.
Hey, I'm Connor. I'm an engineer for Celestia Labs. I work on the Rocket project, and I'm interested in all things scaling, trustation. Can you hear me?
It's pretty choppy. Maybe.
Okay.
Let's move over to Veronica and C-Node. Maybe change your audio, and then we'll come back.
I think it might be the AirPods. I've had this problem before. But yeah, hey guys, my name is Veronica. I am a BD lead at Eclipse. We recently went live on testnet. We are a Solana virtual machine layer 2 that settles on ETH.
Nice. And David?
Hey guys, I'm David Myhall. I do product research at Fuel Labs, and Fuel Labs, we are building a modular execution layer, aiming to be the fastest modular execution layer, and just kind of a whole new kind of operating system for rollups. So excited to be joining all these awesome other projects here.
Nice. Welcome. And Karel, then Cooper.
Hey guys, I'm Karel, founder of Union. We do fully trustless, decentralized, and sovereign interoperability all around live clients and zero-knowledge proofs.
Hey, great to meet everyone. I'm co-founder of Movement Labs, modularizing the Move language and making it accessible to any blockchain environment.
And last but not least, Viaz, welcome. Just got you the StreamYard link a little late.
No worries at all, guys. Pleasure to be here. I'm Vias from the Eigenlayer team. I run product and growth for EigenDA. And yeah, super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. And I hope C-Note comes back. His audio was a bit janky, but while it's just us here, I just want to give you guys a quick story to start this off. That is that Rob and I have been doing DeFi education around crypto, around yield farming, or around blockchains, all this stuff for 3 years. But this year at ETHCC, I faded Modular Summit in favor of an L2 day. Now, looking back on it in December of 2023, I feel like an absolute idiot. So I feel like we're still quite early to this trend, seeing that kind of more and more people are getting, excited about it, and it's coming to the forefront of the space. So I would love to hear from at least a few of you of what modularism, not maximalism, really means in the state of crypto and DeFi as it is today. And then this can kind of lay the foundation for more of the technical and collaborative conversations that we can have for the next hour and a bit. So why don't I start with Cooper, and then we'll go to Veronica, and then to C-Node, and give them a chance to come back on with the audio.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of the first builders within the Move ecosystem. And one of the large pain points that I felt is that despite having a really performant and secure language, we were struggling to see adoption, lack of liquidity, lack of users, lack of projects being built because of the way that Move chains had come to market, competing head-to-head with existing networks. So to me, modularity, not maximalism, really points to the ability for folks to pick whatever tech stacks they want to build with, and then not be limited by what they are building with. So to really be able to break out of those frameworks and put together things that otherwise might not be possible while maintaining alignment with the existing user bases, liquidity bases that are within Web3.
Yeah, so kind of like from my end, modularism, not maximalism, at least for Eclipse, right, is we are looking to bring the best of both worlds from the Ethereum side and Solana side. As we know, the Solana virtual machine with parallel execution, local fee markets, all of the benefits to it, right, kind of points to it being the best execution environment, whilst, the Ethereum environment has a lot of distinctive liquidity, users, and so kind of being able to bridge to both worlds, kind of combining this aspect of modularity instead of pushing for just one, is where really I see like the meaning behind modularism, not maximalism, for our case at least.
I guess to kind of flip this on its head, I would argue that like monolithic chains are almost inherently like drive some form of maximalism, because when you kind of live on these monolithic chains, like your chain has to kind of compete on all different aspects, and by being by being modular chains, it lets us kind of break down the playing field into a number of different ways that we can compete. Execution layers can compete directly against other execution layers, DA layers against other DA layers, money-like assets can compete against money-like assets, more like governance tokens can compete against governance tokens. Like you break down the stack into these little pieces, and then all of a sudden it's not really a religion anymore. It becomes technical debates or economic debates, things like that.
VS, I saw you shaking your head as well.
Yeah, I can't help but agree with most of the team, right? The Eigen ethos has always been about making sure, the ability to innovate is permissionless, open innovation. So we're very much aligned to that. There's just two things that worries me whenever we deal with these circumstances, which is like the fragmentation of liquidity, which I think Cooper touched on, and the fragmentation of ecosystems, which I think everyone touched on, right? So what happens when we move from this like monolithic stack to a modular stack is like, as you split out each of the modules, the amount of economic security also sometimes can fragment, doesn't necessarily have to, but sometimes can fragment between each of these modules, right? And so then you end up with like the weakest link in the chain problem. And so the attack vector is no longer, the aggregate security of, the whole monolithic stack, but rather the individual security of each module. So that's where the Eigenlayer thesis kind of fits in as well to this, where, hey, let's continue to retain the benefits of like programmable innovation, programmable modularity, but also retain the benefits of ecosystems, liquidity, and make sure like where things don't need to fragment, they don't to some extent, right? So that's kind of, again, still aligned to this thesis, but some stipulations that we like to look at from.
Yeah,
Carol,
VS,
you go ahead.
for sure. Yeah, VS has a really good point there, in which, as a lot of different teams are creating a lot of different modular solutions, if we let that play out for a long period of time, you have a lot of mangled stacks in terms of how they might be able to communicate with one another. And so I think that could be a potential point for building and creating methods that are going to enable greater composability, not only between different layer twos, but more so between the frameworks in which people are building modular blockchains with. And that's an area where I think at Movement and Eclipse, we have a really interesting opportunity in, as we are rolling out different execution environments to different networks, it enables some level of composability and communication at the VM level between these different environments. And so excited to share that we're workshopping some pretty interesting ideas with some really awesome folks. Really excited to share more next year.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Welcome, brother. Woo.
I think modularism is the opportunity to focus on one thing and do it well, and try out lots of different ways to do it. For example, the execution layer. You can make your own new VM or modify an existing VM and not need to build consensus. You can simply put a thin wrapper around it using ABCI and try it out with Rollkit. You can ship MVPs on a centralized sequencer very quickly, and then get security from a shared DA layer, pay less for security, innovate more frequently. And if there is fragmentation, then that is through the will of the users. You can easily have one VM which has enough capacity to run all the apps the users want. And if that's what people want, then they're going to put all their liquidity in the same place. If that's not what they want, then you will see fragmentation, but it's through the will of the market ultimately.
Carol, speaking about fragmentation and modularity, you're well versed in this domain.
Yeah, I actually think security-wise, like I agree with Vias, but I think in general, people building in this space are very obsessed with security, formal white papers, and showing that networks are secure under certain conditions. And having been in crypto for almost a decade now, something we kind of suck at is the UX portion. So I actually think the highest risk is the liquidity fragmentation, losing the Lego blocks property that one global VM has. Thing is, we also lose that with transaction parallelization, basically. That's kind of a very localized modularity, but still like technically separate state at the time of transaction execution. So I think for the modular ecosystem to really prove its value, it's a liquidity fragmentation that needs to be properly solved. And that ties in what we do, like interop. And I think that's kind of the next hardest issue to solve. We can all imagine like new VMs and iterating on that, but really building cohesive products between these different L2s and different execution environments. I think that's going to be the hardest one, but also the coolest one, and probably what has the most potential in kind of the growing market. For me, at least, like 1,000 L2s, where basically every single product is its own fully fledged app with its execution, is like this cool future that I want to see crypto evolve to. And I think that's going to perform incredibly well in the next decade.
Yeah, one thing that's very exciting, for so long we've been entrenched in one single tech stack, but for the first time we're seeing the separation of different layers within the blockchain stack, and a lot of teams building really creative, really powerful solutions for builders to be able to augment and leverage them. So we really are, I think, about to enter a renaissance of blockchain development, not only on the smart contract level with different virtual machines, alt VMs being financially and commercially viable for the first time, but additionally in that very blockchain infrastructure space, in which I think we're going to see different games, different consumer applications build things in different ways than we've seen historically existing projects be built primarily within DeFi. So incredibly excited for what the future holds and what all of the folks here are making possible.
Yeah, I've kind of noticed oh, go ahead.
Nope, all you did.
Cool. I was gonna say I've noticed a bit of a shift, I think, in kind of the discussions and the focus this year. I think for most of the history of blockchain, most of the focus has been on like the consensus layer. It's kind of like, proof of work, proof of stake, kind of with rollups. It was figuring out like kind of the fraud proofs, the secret proofs, everything like that. And now we're seeing a shift to the execution layer, kind of the user facing layer. So everything from building out the actual execution layers to, the things like account abstractions, obviously gotten a ton of attention. We're kind of, I think, focusing less on like what's the underlying mechanics of the blockchain, because we've kind of figured a lot of that out. And now we get to kind of focus on like, what is the platform that applications get built upon, and how can we use it to make more powerful apps and better user experiences. And I think like, again, I feel like we're just starting to like really shift like the spotlight onto this, and I think that's going to be like a big explosion. I mean, I think just the projects talking on this call today is like an example of this like growth of focus on this part of the stack.
What's exciting is that we could legitimately create a modular rollup with multiple teams on the panel right now and have the stack actually built, like just by everybody here. It's quite funny. Karel made a good point with regards to parallelization, and that's been a really a kind of hot topic, I guess, as Solana has increased in price and in mind share. This idea of like their parallelized execution, and then you've got like Say and Monad, and then of course the VMs that we have here. We have Movement and Veronica with Eclipse and David and Fuel, and so I kind of want to come back to this kind of parallelized execution conversation after we kind of establish what's I guess been more in our face in the news and kind of coming about, which is the overall DA race. Ethereum has basically shifted its roadmap from a computational focused roadmap, more or less, towards like a DA roadmap. So Ethereum as a DA layer for settlement is kind of this idea of this base boosted rollups thing. But here we have Celestia and Eigenlayer kind of coming in and bringing in 100x lower transactions, or at least, it's yet to be seen, but that's the expectation. So let's start with Vias. I'm curious about your thoughts on this kind of data availability race, kind of what this looks like, what kind of UX users can expect. And then once we hear from you and C-Node, we'll kind of tie it back into some of this parallelized execution and kind of VM layer.
Yeah, for sure. There's been a lot of ongoing initiatives from the Ethereum Foundation in terms of improving data availability in and of itself, right? Proto-donk sharding, 4844. So we're really excited for those existing initiatives to go forward. But as you look at the amount of the amount of data that's being proposed, that's being added to these blocks, it's possible that that's not enough for rollups to really be cost efficient when it comes to just 4844. It's possible that a single rollup might be able to eat up that entire data bandwidth, and so other rollups are still left competing for block space. And so we've kind of defined in sort of simple terms, just like a categorization of DA layers, where there's in protocol DA, which is writing directly to Ethereum L1, and there's out of protocol DA, which is literally everything else, Eigen, Celestia, Avail, etc. Right? And in protocol DA is just you're inheriting maximum Ethereum security, you're inheriting the full Ethereum validator set, and you're eating the additional cost of writing to the L1, which you can see all these rollups teams are spending a great amount of resources towards just writing to the L1. Or you're going to see alternative DA layers like us, which are all out of protocol DAs, that have their own ecosystems. For us, that's based on the Ethereum validator set and the Ethereum restaked. For Celestia, it's their ecosystem, their own chain, right? Data availability blockchain, which I'll let C-Node speak on. So we're super excited that there's a constant game to increase the throughput limitations of the space, reduce costs for these rollups, and really at Eigen we look at it as almost a public utility for these rollups. If the end game of blockchains is through rollup scaling, then these rollups are going to need what's effectively a really high throughput, low latency, low cost data availability solution, and that's kind of where you see the entire landscape going. C-Node?
Sure, yeah. Like you said, Ethereum is trying to add its own DA layer. It's trying to scale up its own DA, and they want to do this using really similar technology to what Celestia has. If you look into dank sharding, you'll see a lot of similarities. It uses erasure coding and data availability sampling to verify the availability of blobs for use in rollups. And I think, while it may be some time away, I'm certainly confident in Ethereum's ability to eventually ship this. And once Ethereum ships this, the DA race is pretty much over. I mean, you could scale that technology up to as much throughput as you need, theoretically. We know because we've tried it. We have the same technology. We've tested it out with much larger block sizes than what's currently on our mainnet. And for that reason, I think that serving Ethereum L2s is kind of a side quest for Celestia. And we expect the DA race to be a short-term competition for serving Ethereum L2s, which is not the main purpose of what Celestia is. Celestia wants to have its own ecosystem. Celestia wants to have its own rollups called sovereign rollups. You can imagine an ecosystem that looks a little bit like Cosmos, where you have sort of application-specific chains that don't talk to one settlement layer, but talk to each other in a trust-minimized way. And I would say that's the long-term vision of where Celestia wants to be. And serving the ETH-L2s is something that we can do really well right now, but it's not the only thing we can do.
Actually, a quick question in regards to that C node. Are you does that include if does that depend on a certain factor of like how much each node is storing in terms of like data replication across nodes? Because I think that's one of the limiting factors to like the throughput scaling, right? Is like how much you know of the how much of the shards is each node storing? I'm familiar that Ethereum thus far has full node replication. Do you know what the process will be going forward on that?
Full node replication, do you mean right now or with 4844 or with future
Right.
DA?
Right now, but yeah, what's kind of the strategy going forward?
Well, I'm not working on Ethereum, but I could try to explain how I think it works. I think they're probably gonna, with 4844, all the full nodes are probably gonna need to manually download all that blob space. Once there's dank sharding validators, so the consensus participants won't need to have all the blob space. They will sample from a builder, a larger node, which does have all the blobs. There's also some designs where nobody has all the blobs and you have way more blob space per block than any one node could individually have. And then you just have lots of people who hold a chunk of it and then they vote based on the perceived availability of data through sampling. But these are kind of out there, kind of far out for everyone, kind of just very theoretical. But the idea is maybe somewhere in the distant future, you'd have more bandwidth than any one node could supply to the network.
That makes sense.
Gotcha. And then just for both of you, prior to jumping into the VMs, because I'm getting on this, we're going to build ourselves a modular rollup by the end of this call conversation here. But is the narrative true of these lower costs? How much of an order of magnitude? Why are the costs significantly lower for using a alternative DA layer? I know that you guys both kind of touched on both these aspects, but just to kind of confirm the why and the how, as well as the order of magnitude of change for costs on Ethereum L2s and other settlement layer based L2s using alternative DA.
Yeah, I think C-Node touched on this, but some of the primitives used in donk sharding are like across most of the data availability solutions, and similar to Celestia, we're at EigenDA, we're also using KZG multi-reveal commits. We're using sharding as well, so it's very similar to the 4844 design. And we're having Donkrad come in and advise as we need on our design principles as well. And yeah, it really comes down to with Eigenlayer, the shared security costs of the platform are distributed across all the services, which is the Eigenlayer ecosystem and the ABSs that are supported. But then the actual distributed the computation costs and the distributed savings of across all the nodes that we're able to achieve, mainly because on EigenDA, nodes only store 1/n the data, or at most 2 over n of the amount of data, n being the number of operators. And then we've designed some anti-congestionary pricing models so that rollups can have certain ways to hedge against pricing and have a lot more fixed pricing over longer periods. So just protecting against gas surges, things like that. So just a couple of different ways of how we're looking at building just more efficient pricing models.
Cheers. Thanks. And then, yeah, I saw a post today from Manta with regards to Celestia's cost reduction on the chart, and it was significantly lower, like that's been advertised order of magnitude of 100 times. So excited to see these be put together with some of the VM friends that we have on the stage. So Veronica, you've been quiet. I would like to hear kind of some of the trade-offs that come with using SVM versus EVM, why you're bullish. Well, I guess you kind of have to be on local fee markets, and your thoughts with regards to building modular using SVM.
Yeah, for sure. I can kind of dive into why we decided to go with the SVM, right? So currently in the crypto space, there's a lot of Ethereum rollups, and one of the things that they are really constrained to is Ethereum and kind of like the global fee markets that come with that. So what I mean is that a lot of rollups were built on Ethereum because they were looking to decrease fees, increase speed, etc. But they're still constrained to Ethereum itself as the layer one, given the way the virtual machine is built out. So the EVM itself is single threaded, which means that transactions have to be processed one after the other. And that kind of inherently is something that isn't really the most scalable. So in comparison with the Solana virtual machine, parallel transactions execution is one of the main things there. So with that, right, you already get much faster transactions, and then local fee markets versus global fee markets. So in the Ethereum realm, when let's say there's like a mass NFT mint, something that you'll notice as more people start using Ethereum is, or even any of the rollups, is that fees do end up spiking a lot. And I was trying to mint an NFT last week, and it was a pretty bad experience, honestly. But you know, kind of like with the Solana virtual machine, right? When anybody does a drop or something where transaction spikes, it happens in its own like localized space, so that other dApps that are running alongside it don't run into the same inherent problem. So with that, that's why we kind of decided to go along with the Solana virtual machine, and we believe that it's the best execution environment out there.
Fast, very, very fast.
Love it. Coop, do you want to kind of build on top of some of what we've heard from the DA layers and a little bit more about parallel execution in the VM world that you guys have built at Move?
Yeah, absolutely. As it relates to local fee markets, I think that's a very relevant conversation I'd have right now as well, with the inscriptions happening lately across different blockchain networks, some of them being ground to a halt. Myself, I was looking to do some trading, and then I'm hit with gas fees and hundreds of dollars. So can't have those local fee markets soon enough, and really excited to be bringing those with the Move language as well. To share a little bit about Move and its story, it was originally conceived at Facebook with the Diem Libra project. They were building a payments blockchain and developed a smart contract language that would be native to Web3, which their big tech, their big finance friends would feel comfortable putting lots of sensitive data and hundreds of millions of dollars on chain, where with Solidity, you have a very wide array of a very large surface area of attack vectors within the code base. And so they created a language where objects are much more akin to physical objects in real life. So passing an object from one hand to another versus passing an object, it kind of appears and then is in a new place. So it really helps on the safeguarding of assets, no reentrancy attacks, as well as enables for greater performance in parallel processing native to the language itself as well. So learning from Solidity, Rust, making some optimizations, and then being this blockchain native programming language. So the Libra Diem project, it got shut down by the government, didn't want to, lots of things going on there. And what was really cool is that it then came to market in Web3 in a more permissionless way, so that people could openly build with Move, learn Move, build Move smart contracts, applications, and launch them in the Aptos and the Sui blockchains. And the next generation of Move that we're going to see here is its ability to be developed with anywhere and everywhere. So Move not just being on any one chain, but being anywhere, everywhere here. And so we're quite excited as well here to be working with a lot of the folks within these calls and the accomplishment of that mission to really democratize Move as much as we can and bring it to market in a Web3 native way.
Hell yeah, join the movement. All right, last part of this panel, and then we're going to move back to more open conversation. Karel, how does Union kind of come into the modular stack and facilitate the kind of seamless integration of these components together, but also just for different stacks and blockchains building with these various DA layers in different VMs underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was alluding a little bit to the biggest issue being fragmentation. I think, like we've been saying, like if this party were to build their own rollup together, we probably scope out the ecosystem based on how easy it would be for us to acquire users, right? Like given that it has a DA available, given we can pick an execution environment, how easily can we get in liquidity? And so for a nascent ecosystem like Celestia, for example, it's going to be massively important that new rollups launching get access to this liquidity as easy as possible, right? Right now means you kind of need to wait in queue for Wormhole or XLR or Layer 0 to support you. And so you're kind of like in a chokehold liquidity-wise. They own all the assets on your rollup. So even though you have your own consensus, your sovereign rollup, you're still shackled to them. As well as that when new rollups spawn, you might not be in the same interoperability cluster. So with Union, what we really focus on is basically having a trustless, permissionless sovereign protocol that can ensure that for this future where we have thousands of L2s, we can spawn these new connections as easily as you set up a new server, right? And you access this wider liquidity network and make sure that this is really Web3 native. To me, like it's very nice that we all do these research articles about how safe a certain DA is. But if we then choose to connect these islands of decentralization with centralized service providers, then the same thing that happened to DM is going to happen to the modular ecosystem. The government is going to attack these interoperability protocols as those are the main points of weakness. So for us to really make sure that like Web3 remains kind of aligned with the original ethos, all parts of the modular stack need to be permissionless, decentralized, and sovereign. And for me, that's all about provability, ZK tech, light clients, and kind of really tying that to core fundamentals of the stack and using that as the layer.
Carol, I got a quick follow-up, and this one goes out to you and maybe for C Corp as well, or C Node as well, which is that we've heard sovereignty quite a bit kind of in the last 30 minutes, but as well as just emerging a little bit more as we talk about some of these discussions. What does sovereignty mean to you, and how does it relate to modularity?
Yeah, so to me, sovereignty really means that you own your own stack, which means that in the case of L2 builders, they decide the execution environment and the direction of the execution environment itself. For L2s, it can mean that they're not tied to a new fork choice rule, right? So if you're settling on Ethereum and Ethereum goes into a wildly different direction that you disagree with, you have the ability to settle differently and basically control your own fork choice rule. And for interop, what this means is that even if you have all of these sovereign parts of the stack, the buttons that are used to interact with the protocol, the Oracle data feeds, the assets themselves and how they're bridged or locked aren't being controlled from the outside as well. And as like an L2 island itself, you do have control of the direction here too.
Yeah, I would say sovereignty is kind of like a Cosmos chain. Any individual Cosmos chain can hard fork itself. And the way that it currently works with IBC, that wouldn't break the bridge because it kind of just trusts the validators. And so, Osmosis could upgrade and the bridges would all still work. Whereas with the Ethereum L2s, assuming they were idealized and they got rid of their governance and their upgradability, they are forced to hard fork with the base layer and they can't hard fork themselves. Kind of like immutable apps on Ethereum can't hard fork away from L1. I mean, and obviously everything is social consensus. So like in a really extreme circumstance, they could, but it's kind of ridiculous and wouldn't really actually happen. But being able to hard fork, some people want that. Otherwise, Cosmos wouldn't exist. And clearly, there is a desire for some apps to be sovereign. Not the best choice for everything. A lot of things benefit a lot from not being sovereign and being part of a larger ecosystem. But some things do. Some things should be. There's a lot of interesting possibilities for apps that are sovereign. For example, they can do things like enshrine the Oracle and remove Oracle risk in a way that is much safer than on when it runs as a smart contract on another chain. enshrinement and security through client diversity becomes possible in a way that it isn't on regular apps. And so make the design space possible, allow people to try out new things.
One thing I think is going to be really interesting too, that the kind of the modular architecture enables, is chains that want to transition in and out of sovereignty. We've seen recently a few chains kind of go away from sovereignty. We've seen a few L1s become Ethereum L2s. I think of like Celo. I'm blanking on the other ones. So those ones you could say are probably kind of more for like probably economic and alignment reasons, that they want to kind of join the Ethereum ecosystem. But the MakerDAO post for a few months back from Rune, obviously it was just a blog post. This wasn't something that's actually happened, but it was an example of a project that's kind of been very tied to the immutable Ethereum ecosystem, but has reached such scale that they're probably feel that it makes sense to kind of move towards full sovereignty, being a fully sovereign chain, which is why Rune kind of made this this proposal about a kind of MakerDAO chain. And that's something that'd be very difficult to do. I think it definitely would have been very difficult to do in the past, but I think in the future it'll become very easy for kind of modular chains, because they're choosing their settlement layer, their execution layer, their DA layer. They can kind of just choose to make a change to a piece of that setup and kind of move from being a Ethereum settled rollup into a fully sovereign, a sovereign Celestia rollup or something along those lines. I think I'm going to be really excited to see like the first major project that makes that transition, because I think that's going to like be a really interesting kind of example case.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting how the sovereignty kind of playbook has also manifested itself in the Ethereum ecosystem. It's kind of like spurring the demand from the Ethereum ecosystem to like adapt and kind of build a more permissionless future. That's kind of where we think of it as Eigen, where we are seeing more and more projects want to see an expanded design space, like C-Node mentioned, and a more modular design space that enables them to like he said, hard fork if that's a request that they have, enshrine the Oracle, client diversity. These are all really good points. I think the thing about relying on the Ethereum ecosystem also has to do with like benefiting, as I mentioned earlier, from like this aggregated economic security, right? And the largest developer ecosystem. Right? Those are things that like are really hard to like transition away from and then still tap back into that ecosystem. So when it comes to a project like Celo, like David mentioned, there are some economic incentives at play for sure. But at the same time, a lot of that underpinning comes from the economic security of the application, right? And in proof of stake systems where security is determined on token price and market cap, not having your entire security built on that and being able to leverage the Ethereum restaked economic security as well as the validator set can really assist a lot of these alt L1s as they want to enable a more sovereign or permissionless future, but at the same time be tied to a larger economic security base and ecosystem, right?
Yeah, it brings me to the point of kind of perhaps a fear of mine and many other strong Ethereum believers, or you could even call them maxis, which is kind of why we're here today, to kind of break the chains of maximalism, which is that with the upcoming growth of alternative VMs, like the 3 that we have today, as well as data availability, the 2 that we have today, you start to wonder, where does Ethereum's role even come in the modular blockchain space? For me, it's going to be hard to refute that Ethereum will ever change and not be the best settlement layer. Perhaps 1 or 2 kind of can come close. But to me, just based on the validator set, upcoming improvements with DVT, the overall expansion of decentralization, the ease of becoming a solo staker, as well as just the general security model, it's tough to kind of, I think, argue that Ethereum will lose as a settlement layer. But and this is an open question, and I think that we can have a lot of kind of conversation here, which is the prevalence of modular blockchains over the coming years, is it a detriment in the short term to Ethereum, but beneficial long term? Is it beneficial for all? kind of what are your thoughts with regards to the modular blockchain kind of growth, specifically with DA and VM, taking those responsibilities, if you will, from Ethereum, thus accruing value in different areas? Kind of, does this strengthen Ethereum's position as the long-term settlement layer? Is it a threat? Kind of, how are you guys viewing this and thinking about it from the lens of sovereignty and as well as from the lens of building your own chains? And yeah, we'll start with Coop because he looks ready to pounce, and then we'll just go around.
Yeah, for sure. I think you bring up a lot of great points, Andy, where I would, in my initial thoughts are that short term, it's very good. Long term will be up in the air. That Ethereum, EVM, and the Solidity smart contract language were all three such great leaps forward for their time. It's like trying to hit a bullseye from thousands of miles away. And then as markets grow, right, as the Web3 ecosystem and mindshare grows as well, the target's also moving. So it's near impossible to land the first time. And thus we see scaling solutions such as modularity coming to light. That like fees, oh my gosh, it's very cumbersome right now to pay for anything on Ethereum. I can't imagine what it would be like if we onboard another billion users using this chain right now. And so these solutions, in order to bring other innovative tech to Ethereum, where a pain point that we've seen for a while is being entrenched in this full stack of Ethereum technology, right? It's like being stuck with a PS2 when your PC friends, all of these different parts are being created, and you're not able to do anything with them. So what modularity enables is in this short term for Ethereum folks to be able to leverage these really powerful tech stacks that are coming to market that otherwise would be siloed to alt chains, and allows the builders on those alt chains to not be shooting themselves in the foot by choosing to not build with the accepted and adopted tech stack and infrastructure existing with Ethereum. So then the golden question here becomes what this means long term. Are builders, developers going to be able to understand these different tech stacks? Because even coming to understand one piece of the four parts of modular blockchains, from the settlement, execution, consensus, and DA, can be very tough to learn, even as someone who's native to this space. And so are we going to see people building efficiently and effectively with these stacks? Or are we going to see entire alt chains such as Solana continue putting up numbers and just completely mitigate and circumvent all of this conversation that we're having around Ethereum?
Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was originally convinced that Ethereum in the end would only host a bunch of Merkle roots and perhaps some proofs and be solely doing proof verification and perhaps some DA stuff. I think now with like proof aggregation technology, we don't even need to save up that much block space for verifying ZK proofs. And with DA kind of going into Eigenlayer and Celestia, might actually, after the whole modular cycle, see a bit of a renaissance on Ethereum for just apps directly on the L1, because as a commodity, of course, we're going to do such cost optimizations on the DA that minting an NFT might become affordable again. I do think that because we've been operating in such a limited space, like Cooper's been saying, we've really been avoiding a lot of use cases for crypto, GameFi and such, and basically been so focused on what's possible within this very limited sandbox that is the EVM, focused on very simple finance, that now with modular, we're basically going to be able to do much more advanced and much cooler stuff altogether. And so we might see that on Ethereum itself and on the L1 itself, it's actually going to be the most simple applications. And in the modular space itself, we're going to see the really high performance, really sophisticated financial tools, far more sophisticated than XY equals K or concentrated liquidity. So it's kind of what I as a builder find most interesting, to really sink my teeth into kind of using all of these tools to build club dexes, dexes that kind of outperform TradFi in a lot of different ways.
I think there's something really appealing about putting all the apps in one giant composable state machine. Clearly, that's a good thing, and a lot of people like that, and there's a lot of need for that. And also, a lot of people like Ethereum just because they are long on ETH for whatever reason, or they've been using it for a long time, or they have positions on there, or what have you. But I think one could extrapolate that big, high-capacity, parallelized roll-ups on ETH, or maybe just one or two of them, will dominate and eventually be where all the activity on ETH comes from. And so then the only thing the settlement layer does is settle proofs for one gigantic rollup, or maybe two gigantic rollups, or just a few. And then the way that ETH makes its money is DA, unless the rollup is also sequenced by ETH, in which case there can also be some MEV. But I think it's a little bit too early to tell how the mega rollup would be sequenced. There's a lot using centralized sequencers. Shared sequencers are pretty fast and a pretty good solution. But there's also been talk of these like pre-confirmation schemes that make rollups fast, even without needing any sort of additional sequencing besides the L1. But regardless of that, there's always been a belief that Cosmos and Ethereum can coexist. There's always been a belief that you can have like the one unified environment and then the one environment where apps are sovereign and interconnected. And a lot of people like both. It seems like this thesis has held up for long enough now that we can pretty confidently say that it'll be around to stay. So yeah, I would say that like ETH will exist, and something that looks like Cosmos will also exist, and they will survive until the end of time independently.
I can't totally agree with that, but I'll push back slightly on the independently part of it. We're super excited about a project called Ethos that's building on Eigen as part of our AVS ecosystem. And Ethos is focused on running a minimal bridge from Ethereum to Cosmos, communicating over IBC to consumer chains. So it will act as a communication layer and a liquidity layer between Ethereum and Cosmos, allowing these Ethereum restakers to support that ecosystem as well. So totally agree that both of these ecosystems will continue to exist, but as CNode mentioned, there is a future for that interoperability. There is a future for those two ecosystems to thrive together, expand economic activity. And I think one thing that we have to think about is like, with all this additional infrastructure building that's been happening over the last, 18 months, 2 years, where the focus has been infra, at least most of the dominant builders have been infra builders. What are all the next generation use cases that we're thinking about to bring onto the Ethereum ecosystem, right? As mentioned, if based on today's existing landscape, it's very possible that there's a centralization of rollups. There's minimal rollups that are settling, and there isn't as much, potentially not as much utility for Ethereum other than being the settlement layer for a select few rollups. But if we can increase the overall adoption, bring in new user groups, bring in new use cases, then potentially we can change that and expand the value propositions across these ecosystems.
I think that's a really important point. Is we've seen we've kind of only seen like two real use cases with decent PMF. Like DeFi is kind of the main one, and obviously NFTs have been quite strong. But as more and more uses come in, people have been speculating for a long time about gaming coming in, and I assume there's social as well. Some of these new use cases might have less dependency on like one shared state machine, like this interdependency. Like obviously that interdependency is really great for DeFi, but like gaming, that might not matter as much. Social, that might not matter as much. So with different constraints, like there'll be kind of different demands for different types of stacks. And so, some chains might make more sense as a separate individual chain. They might not need certain types of security guarantees, certain types of DA guarantees. Every application will be kind of free to kind of make that trade-off themselves.
Yeah, and that's one thing that Rob and I have been learning quite a bit over the last several months with regards to modular blockchains, is that a lot of the specialization of each stack is actually trying your best to, for lack of a better term, evade a trade-off and instead impose something better, or a light version, like a light node, light client, or in your case with Fuel, David, when you guys kind of do the execution, you kind of spread it out, and I forget exactly how Nick said it, but there's a mechanism in which you can kind of assess a large amount of either information or data transactions, and basically like you can prove or verify this information at the DA with data availability sampling, and at other layers using these kind of like light clients or light nodes. Could you guys explain to me and to the audience kind of the presence of light clients and this idea of like sampling, or kind of how you guys at the specialized layer are able to evade some of these typical trade-offs that come with the blockchain trilemma, but may not be so prevalent in a modular blockchain because of the technology that you guys have brought in at your own individual layer. And if there's anybody keen to kind of start, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on light clients being a kind of a really important piece of like a modular blockchain stack, and being able to kind of go back and learn from the mistakes of the past. Like Ethereum, it's very hard to make like a good light client that people can actually run. That's why we're all dependent on Infura for kind of getting our data. We can't really verify data on our phone for like mainnet Ethereum. So when Fuel was kind of being architected, it was built from the ground up to be, Fuel uses this UTXO model, which is it doesn't have like one massive Merkle root. I don't need to dig too much into the technical details, but the idea is that it's easy to kind of download a proof from a server where you can validate the state of a Fuel chain, and you can do it on a very lightweight device, and you can kind of do it alongside if you have a Fuel chain running on like Celestia. Celestia also is a project that has built from the ground up to have light clients enabled. So this gives like a lot more assurances to users. So that's kind of something that plays to just the ethos of building decentralized technology, which was kind of touched on earlier about how we make sure we don't end up building technology that gets taken over by governments. The other thing that light clients are super important for is interoperability. The Cosmos ecosystem is kind of IBC is totally built around this idea of light clients. IBC lets chains communicate each other by running light clients of each other's chains and kind of validating transactions against these light clients. So in this modular world where we likely have many different chains, different execution environments, things like that, light clients are also incredibly important for that to enable interoperability between chains. And so a lot of kind of our research work we're doing right now is how do we enable good interoperability between two different rollups using these light clients, letting two different chains kind of prove the state of another chain, with a shared DA layer or a shared settlement layer, things like that. Again, kind of ensuring it's decentralized and ensuring that we can kind of unfragment this very fragmented world that we have right now of all these different like disconnected L2s.
So the reason why I think that data availability sampling destroys the blockchain trilemma, well, first of all three of the words in the trilemma are pretty poorly defined: scalability, decentralization, and security. But the way I interpreted it was, at least for scalability, that could be transactions per second, and decentralization is cost to use the chain trustlessly, cost to use the chain without needing to trust an intermediary to query it. Like David said with Infura, how everybody right now just blindly trusts Infura whenever they use the chain because they don't have their own node. The way that we want to solve that is with trust minimized light clients. So you want to have a service that a user can run, which verifies the correctness of the chain's consensus. So that's the signed headers from the validator set, the execution of the blockchain state machine, and it can verify that with either fraud proofs or ZK proofs, ideally ZK proofs, because then they don't have the 1 out of n assumption. And then the last thing that you also need to verify is DA, because if you download a header that contains a valid ZK proof, you must know that there exists a corresponding block to that header. And that is what data availability sampling is. And that's the one where the cost to verify just goes up linearly when you increase the TPS. Sampling is your way out of that. Sampling is your way of keeping the cost of verifying DA constant regardless of how much TPS you have. So you can crank the bandwidth up for the full nodes, but keep the bandwidth usage of the light nodes constant regardless of the overall throughput of the network. And so that's how we have we can make trust minimized light clients possible. And there's kind of a long way to go until we get there. None of the sovereign rollups right now have particularly promising fraud-proof or ZK-proof implementations that work perfectly with our, namespace Merkle tree and our 2D Reed Solomon square. That's in the works, but you have to take it one step at a time. And we just shipped mainnet, so we have DAS live now, and the rest of the pieces are starting to come together.
And Karel, I think you were going to go into less on the cost, but perhaps more of the interoperability and security with the light client.
Yeah, I would say in like the modular space, light clients are even more important than before. It's basically what was previously all performed by the single monolithic stack. These tasks are now sent out to perhaps completely different components. And the best way to track these components, of course, is with a light client. And in the end, on Ethereum, you observe Celestia state through light clients like Blockstream is a ZK light client itself. And so the more things we modularize, the more important it is to either run those modular components on a very large amount of nodes, which is kind of Eigenlayer's approach, right? Like keep it kind of simple, but just run it on a bunch of computers and have attestations to that. And the other fundamental approach is like somehow compress this computation that was done and be able to track it to light clients. And the most promising stuff here seems to be to push that in the ZK sense. Because otherwise, with the light client, you're still going to be performing a lot of computation. And a light client isn't that light if you're going to allocate half of your block space to performing light client verification. So you need to keep that very lean as well. And then kind of into blockchain trilemma. I also always thought it was poorly defined. To me, it's the CAP theorem, right? Database science. Like you can't have consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. And I think with modular right now, what we're kind of doing is we're going to give up somewhere a little bit of consistency and availability. We're adding some latency. So the atomicity is going away. But for that, we're going to get massive scalability. And this is kind of what all of the major web players also did, right? Like Google, Facebook, etc. They gave up atomic consistency to be able to go planet scale. And modular can do the same. I'm very curious to see like if you could actually get Solana itself like performance enough to go planet scale. I think from like very large Web2 companies, we've learned that you really can't do this. You can't have like this single instance that can scale that much. That's also, by the way, why I'm a bit bearish on like atomic composability in the modular ecosystem, because that'll kind of get rid of some of the advantages that modular gives you.
Very cool. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of debate. That all kind of started with the is Ethereum screwed question or not, by the way. And then we got into light clients, which is very interesting. And now I kind of want to pass over to more of kind of what is being built now. We have about 15 minutes, and then we'll let the community do some kind of Q&A and perhaps some more broad questions. But yeah, I would love to hear about the products that are being built now from each of you, or just generally what you think the modular space is trending towards, and how you're positioning yourself and your company, your project to kind of be in that realm. So yeah, why don't we start with Cooper, and then we'll make a round here.
Yeah, our vision here is that Move can become a public good, such that in the Move stack, which we're building, it can be integrated with any existing developer toolkit, whether that be the Arbitrum Orbit, Polygon CDK, be the existing OP stack, even some ZK stacks as well, such that the Move language becomes fully portable, fully modular. You can build with it where you want, how you want, and with whatever stack that you want. So keep an eye out for some exciting news coming around end of this year, early next year with Movement Labs, and you can see some of the first networks that will be supporting with this.
Sweet. C-Node, where's the modular space? Or here we go. Veronica, welcome.
Sorry, yeah, no, I have a bit of a cold right now, so I haven't been speaking that much. But no, we're really excited with Eclipse. I personally am focused on a lot of our consumer side of the things, really focused on user experience, mass adoption, really. So lots of things in gaming, social fi. So pretty excited to be bringing all of that to Eclipse, which should be mainnetting around Q1 of next year. So you guys should look out for some fun games. We will have a lot of NFT initiatives, and yeah, a lot of stuff also happening on the DeFi side, but just a very strong personal interest on consumer dApps.
Nice. I think we're going to just put a pause right here. I think Rob's going to take us right back into the weeds since we do have a little bit more time. Rob, did you have a technical one?
Yeah, I mean, we can spend lots of time in the weeds, but I think like when it comes to integrating a lot of the tech that we have here, like I love the spirit of like building a modular rollup like right here on this stream. So like I'd love to just kind of like go on like that train of thought, which is essentially like I'm curious if anyone has ideas, like how would you construct like the projects that are here across DA, VMs, and interop? Like how would one of you guys go about constructing one of these rollups with like a focus on evading some of the trade-offs that aren't available by constructing a monolithic chain or one of these traditional rollup constructions? Like what is new and innovative about these modularity constructions that allows us to evade certain trade-offs? If you guys have any ideas, it's not super in the weeds, but I'm curious, like, so that we can inspire some of the builders that are listening and watching as far as how they could combine the tools that each of the projects here have built.
I can kick off with something is like one of our kind of theses and one of the ways that we're thinking when we're designing Fuel is we're kind of trying to like skate where the puck is going with this modular ecosystem. And part of that we'd say is that in some sense, the DA problem is kind of solved. We've got two great DA teams on this call here, and we've also got Ethereum, kind of with bank sharding in its plan, and that right now, like on for rollups, data availability is the most expensive resource. If you send an Arbitrum transaction, like most of your fee is paying for DA, and so there's like some teams are kind of really like focused on compressing that, but we think in a pretty short period of time, it's going to completely flip, and that DA is going to be the cheapest resource. And so when we're building Fuel, we're kind of trying to actually maximize our usage of DA, because it's actually the other resources. It's the execution and it's the state growth that are the harder problems to solve. And so if we can kind of make that trade-off, use DA because we think DA is going to be like cheap and available, and kind of put more stuff into DA so that we don't have to put as much data into state, so that we don't have to do as much computation in execution. That's kind of what we're trying to do with Fuel, and we think that's going to be kind of a key part of the architecture of the kind of chains of the future. Is once we have this modular architecture, your assumptions about how to build a chain, how to build an execution layer change. So I guess if we're building a rollup here, that's kind of one constraint or one design decision that I would add to our rollup that we're building.
On that point, C-Node and Vias, I know that Celestia has a blob stream, which kind of fights that state bloat problem in a sense at the DA layer. How can we build atop of what David said today with your respective projects to kind of build a top Fuel VM or kind of insert VM here to solve that state bloat problem? And how do you see kind of builders thinking about this when choosing a DA layer or just when choosing a VM? And yeah, let's put this roll up together.
Well, I mean, the first question you should ask is, do you want to be on Ethereum or do you want to be sovereign? There's and then
that is a hot take.
Hot take?
I'm just messing. Keep going.
Once you decide, then you would either use Rollkit from Celestia, which is our well, I mean, it's a public good sovereign rollup framework that works on any DA layer. It works with any VM that you can wrap with the ABCI interface, which we have tested with EVM, Cosmos SDK, and Fuel. Yeah, pick a VM that scales. Pick a VM that has a good smart contract language that you like and that you devs can build good apps with, and we can do it all.
One quick follow up here is that, do you guys think we need more infrastructure, or do you think like now with all the explosion of modular tooling, we have plenty of VMs, we have plenty of DA layers, we have plenty of these tools, like we have enough infrastructure to now focus towards consumer facing applications?
I think
VS, you can tie that in too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think above all else, right now we need education on how to best be leveraging these different stacks. A lot of it's very brand new. We've made a lot of great leaps forward in terms of creating new infrastructure. And now we just need to figure out what works, what sticks, what breaks, what's going to scale. And from there, I think it's going to become more clear what infrastructure is necessary, connecting the gaps between them.
Yeah, I think you should never build infrastructure ahead of time. First, run into growth issues, make sure that you have a real pain point, and then solve it. With DA, we have that, right? Philips are spending a lot of money on this, so you need to solve this. With interop, we have a real issue here with liquidity fragmentation, so we need to solve that. And I think, to be honest, like everything I'm just doing right now comes from original issues. Same with execution environments, verification. And so now it's time to actually build those consumer apps and run into the next growth issues. And basically make sure that at some point all of our products are completely unusable again, and then find the next iteration.
I can't help but agree with Karel, right? I think you're touching on like infrastructure having product market fit as well, which I think is important. And I'm gonna take somewhat of a methodical, like measured response to this one, because like there's a lot of moving pieces. I feel like one of our major theses looking at data availability right now is like there's this most of the demand today and most of the fees paid are coming from, like, as we mentioned, like a lot of DeFi use cases, order book dexes, NFT marketplaces, etc. Right, and these projects have a lot of value there's value per transaction, and then there's throughput, right, which are like two of the dominant demands. Value per transaction almost always puts a demand on security, and then throughput usually has a lower value per transaction but more high frequent state updates. You can picture things like on-chain gaming, social networks, etc. in the future, right? And so you see this like trade-off that these projects make, where there's high throughput needed, but not necessarily a high demand for security, or not necessarily maybe a high demand for security, but there's a low value per bit in each of these transactions, whereas these DeFi projects have a really high value per bit. And so Sino touched on this, but like if you're building a rollup, it depends on like which ecosystem you want to play game with, right? So like there's a couple of ecosystem builders in terms of VMs here, but really if you want to be an Ethereum rollup, then we say you have to pretty much write to the in protocol DA, right? Which is writing back to the L1, right? And that's the definition to some extent of an Ethereum rollup. Any rollup that doesn't settle on Ethereum is now using an out of protocol DA, right? If you're using an out of protocol DA, now you have the choice of, again, going back to which ecosystem do you want to be associated with? Which ecosystem do you want to build on? And at Eigenlayer, we're looking to re-enable this. As Karel mentioned earlier, we're trying to be this coordination mechanism for stakers and operators to participate in like solving some of these challenges within the Ethereum ecosystem, right? So we're staying very much within this large pool of liquidity, developers, users, etc. And so the real question then is, if you wanted to build a rollup on Ethereum, likely we would at Eigen, we would push you towards one of these rollups as a service, or RDKs that are infrastructure players as well, because they've abstracted away most of the complexity required to like actually go about building it. Quite often it can be as simple as like a couple of clicks and now you've got a rollup deployed, right? So and again, we've touched on the user experience problem and product market fit problem, right? So if we want to get super simple, and Celestia is also integrated with a lot of these rollups as a service, or RDKs, as Sino mentioned. So you're able to like really go in, choose what stack you want to build on, choose what VM you want to be using choose what DA layer you're subscribed to. So really, a lot of these players like Caldera, Conduit, they're the ones who have abstracted away the complexity for the end rollup developer. And so if we're going about this game of like trying to decide what to build on, it's really what ecosystem do you want to be subscribed to, and then who's the infrastructure player that's abstracted away the complexity. The thing about building on Eigen is we also have this ecosystem of services, actively validated services that are being built on this restaking platform. And, you know, we have projects that are doing proof of location or proof of machinehood, or building watchtower networks, or also building, you know, fast finality layers, cross-chain liquidity protocols. And I highly recommend you guys look at 13-year-old VC's tweet today, which is kind of highlighting a bunch of the partners in our ecosystem and kind of giving a really succinct, you know, but quite explanatory breakdown of like a lot of the partners that are building on us. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it in terms of if you choose to build on Ethereum and you settle with an in-protocol DA, you're an Ethereum rollup. If you choose to use an out-of-protocol DA, you have to decide whether you want to be an Ethereum rollup, a Celestia rollup, or an Avail rollup, or etc.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that's gotten me most excited about modularity, coming back to the first point of skipping Modular Summit in Paris this year in favor of an Ethereum L2 rollup day, is that the optionality of crypto is a lot of the reason why any of us are even here, right? Crypto in and of itself is an option to break free or to choose away from the traditional financial system that is represented in your country. And then coming into like the modular stack, no longer do we have to choose one monolithic chain or one design. We get to kind of be a chemist, or we get to pick as if we were at a restaurant off of a menu what we're hungry for that night, what our use cases and our specific desires are for our game, or for our heavy finance primitive, or for our social app, or for insert use case here. And that's what's super exciting kind of to me. And building off that for you guys, we've been talking a lot kind of about the developments of the space, each part. We're coming to the last 15 minutes. We have a request for some alpha, no questions, just alpha. And so I'm going to put it in a question for you guys. How do you see value accruing in the modular stack compared to a monolithic chain? And let me give you a visual. I click a transaction on modular rollup A, it goes through execution layer, DA layer. There's a sequencer in there. Then we go back down to the settlement layer, right, and kind of reach that consensus that the transaction was processed. There's little bits of value being extracted and revenues being generated at each of those levels. So yeah, the alpha is how is value accrued in the modular blockchain world, and are there any comparisons that we can look to in the monolithic world to perhaps ease our speculative desires? And please don't go overboard if your legal team's going to kill you, but how does value accrue in the modular world?
Yeah, I really love the comparison of consoles to PCs, in which when you're building a computer, you're able to have top of the line parts accomplishing very different purposes, from your CPU, your GPU, your hard drive, memory, all of this good stuff. The value accrual exists between those different parts. As each one is at its highest level of performance, you're getting compounding growth, compounding returns between the power of the overall system. And so you're actually able to create this whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Another really exciting benefit of modularity is that it's really good for the biodiversity of blockchains. That over the long course of ETH, we see a lot of forks of a lot of the same protocols. And then when one of them gets hacked, it means you have cascading vulnerabilities throughout a number of different protocols. And trust isn't just fractured in that moment, but it's actually unclear what you can trust to begin with and what applications are exposed to these sorts of same vulnerabilities. And so on top of that, gaining access to ecosystems of entirely new applications written in entirely new languages, while also benefiting from those very infrastructural stacks and the benefits compounding of those, makes for a very exciting modular future. and very exciting future which Movement Labs is bringing with our ecosystem of move-based applications, frameworks, and networks that are going to be coming and stacking on top of existing networks, which you all are familiar with.
Anyone else want to take a speculative stab or a theoretical?
Sure. I think even though fees will be low, because we're gonna successfully make scalable things, all the layers can still be profitable. Kind of like how when you buy something at the store, the retailer is profitable, the shipping company is profitable, and the wholesaler is profitable. You'll have whoever controls the ordering makes money off MEV. If you're sending transactions that create MEV, whoever's doing execution will make enough to pay back the cost of executing the transaction, plus a little bit to make it worth their while. Same goes for the DA layer and consensus layer.
I would then even add on top of that, because you make every single component as efficient as you can, like Cooper said, you commoditize them all much more efficiently. So where apps right now overpay a lot for the features they use, basically they can themselves accrue a lot more value, which then in turn kind of goes to the communities of each of these applications, right? So in the end, hopefully, it's actually the end users that accrue most value, and all of a sudden we'll be making $15 more on each trade, since they won't be paying the gas fee every single time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is that the modular stack enables more competition, because it kind of allows competition at more finely grained pieces of the stack. And oftentimes competition will it'll squeeze margins, and we'll see that kind of anything that's commoditized, anything that can be easily duplicated or turned to a service, like the margins are gonna get squeezed down, the fees are gonna get pushed down, which again is great for a user. Users will get lower fees. It can be a challenge for projects trying to kind of figure out how to build something sustainable, something where they can kind of capture some value. Where we see value capture in the real world, one example is obviously if you have a network effect. Network effects are incredibly difficult to overcome. Blockchains, and crypto does provide some interesting tools to kind of overcome network effects. You can do fun things with tokens, but still, like, there's a reason Ethereum is worth a huge amount, and Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. There's a million Ethereum killers that are worth nothing, and it has nothing to do with their technology. It has to do with the network effects of the community and the developers and the applications around Ethereum. And the other place where I think you can really accrue value is if you are accruing risk or assuming risk. Risk is something that needs to be compensated for. It's something that's certainly not commoditized. And if you're any protocol that can kind of split risk off and kind of allow one type of user to kind of pay for lower risk and have that value be assumed by another party that's more risk tolerant. I think that's like personally, I think that's the most interesting part of the kind of value accrual space. And I guess that's all I'll say on that. But there's my take.
Beauty.
I think you make it not necessarily sound bleak, but to go on that commoditizing doesn't mean that necessarily needs to be harder for infra builders or the large DA projects. I think the cheaper and more efficient you can actually provide the service, the bigger you can grow. DTCC, I think, settles 2 quadrillion a year, and kind of their share and their fee of this is only a couple of billion in profits every year. But the fact that they're able to execute this so efficiently, so cheaply, allows this market to grow to an absolutely massive size. And as long as, like, for some fundamental services, we need to charge a lot in crypto, we kind of cap how big this market can become. If you trade on Ethereum, obviously gas price will go up the more trades happen, which means that trading-wise, Ethereum can only settle so much until trades need to increase in size. You lose granularity, they become less efficient. So we've kind of kept the settlement volume at the moment. And by going more efficient, we can up that volume significantly.
It's not necessarily a race to the bottom in terms of like DA and lowering fees for sequencers and for kind of the settlement layers or the execution layer. It's actually a matter of as you're saying, Kara, widening the total addressable market and then offering a way better experience, and then maybe taking a little bit And I think that even you guys at the DA and VM layer, and perhaps we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but there's also talks of subsidizing those costs that you guys are will be incurring, and then fees charged, kind of like how Optimism does sequencer fees and then gives it back into retroactive grants. I've also heard talks about kind of those subsidies potentially coming into play, where those fees are actually being reused to boost the community in some capacity.
Yeah, it's something that we're exploring on our side. In addition to democratizing this language, the platform that folks interact with as well, such that builders, if you're building an application, it's only fair that a portion of gas that's being used on your application is being returned both to you as a team, to you as a protocol, and of course to the ecosystem itself. So really looking to model things like we see in a carbon or phosphorus cycle in nature within Web3 and within these financial systems that we develop.
Yeah, I can't help but agree with the design space that most people are mentioning here. I think we are moving to I think two key points that were touched upon is like both the race to the bottom in terms of cost optimization, but also as a result needing to widen the larger net and bring in more users and adoption, things like that. We're still very much designing our pricing model, designing how slashing works, which is kind of how risk is handled in Eigenlayer. I can briefly touch on kind of how the architecture for Eigenlayer works and what payments will look like in the future, but obviously not the payment model. But these services that are borrowing security and validation from the economic security restakers and the validators on Ethereum will need to be compensated for opting into this slashing condition as well as running the service. And so it's in the future these services will all be paying fees back to this ecosystem of operators and stakers, which we're really excited to kind of be the coordination layer for. In terms of DA specifically, which is something we built internally and is a service that relies on this platform, but we get to exercise a lot more of the decision making over. There will likely be subsidized fees for most of our launch partners. What that looks like and how that works is still very much up in the air. We have something along the lines of an AWS pricing model, where it's kind of like reserved instances versus spot instances on AWS. You could kind of picture a future like that, how DA would work, but that's still very much in design, something that we're fleshing out right now and are looking to announce closer to mainnet.
Nice. Yeah, every time that I get closer to these conversations, and Ra, I'll pass it over. I always think about these things from like a user degen perspective. Like if I'm freaking putting my capital at risk on your modular rollup powered by movement and Eigen, I'd better be getting little hints of tidbits into my wallet every $1,000 of economic value that I bring. And so I love just kind of thinking about this from like, how can we also enrich the users and make them happier and more loyal to kind of what you're doing, almost as if they didn't even need to kind of know it on underneath. So
totally. And I'll give you a not so spicy perspective on where the value accrues, which is that it's back at the users. And it's like everyone here drew very vibrant like mental models for like where the value flows. If it starts in a user's wallet, where does it go after that? And like up until now, I mean, since we started this development journey, which was like the fat application thesis, and then it was the fat protocol thesis, and it's like a one-way flow of where this value accrues. Modularity breaks all that, and it means that the value accrues in this just explosion of value across multiple layers, which I think was a perspective all of you guys shared. And ultimately it's reciprocal. Now modularity, it's a two-way street, and a lot of the value is then flowing back into the communities, which are made up by the users and the builders and the contributors.
Yeah, just adding to that, right? Like most of us, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a big Spotify user. I use a lot of different applications, like very much still tapped into the Web2 space, right? And the majority of applications that we use in Web 2 are comprised of plenty of different, infrastructure SaaS modules that we don't interface with as the end user. They're just purely abstracted away, right? We're using OAuth for sign-in, and that's almost default, right? None of us think about sign-in with Google, sign-in with Facebook, etc., but that's OAuth. Okay, that's a module right there, right? You have Stripe that's doing some sort of payment processing on the back end, right? That's another module that's completely abstracted away from the end user. There's likely some optimization modules that the service that you're using is like underneath, and most likely the entire stack is being hosted on some cloud provider as well. But each of these infrastructure players is getting a fraction of the revenue of the users, the user adoption, the daily active user rate, etc. But at the same time, like, all of this is being abstracted away from the end user because the experience determines the amount of value accrual to some extent. And Robbie, to your point, like, that at the end of the day, this all goes back to usage, adoption, and user experience, which I think as infrastructure players, we don't necessarily spend as much time on, but that's where rollups, and I think downstream of them, the dApps, will be forced to spend the most amount of time on going into the next couple of years in this, adoption focused cycle.
Adoption focused cycle powered by modular blockchains, powered by open-mindedness, optionality, scalability, best UX ever, coming very, very soon. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on, ending on an optimistic note. Very much appreciate the great vibes and the information. I know that the community is very excited about this niche and this vertical, just based off the amount of questions and different types of conversations happening in private degen. We've got private degen whale chats of guys who are like, what is a data availability? So guys, we have a long way to go in the education to get the whales on board, and the rest of the users as well. So again, thank you so much for coming on, and we will continue to try our best to educate the users through our platform, as well as have as many of you guys consistently on as possible, and it would not be possible without you guys. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. A lot of fun.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for coming. Cheers. Oh, you're on mute.
Modularism, not maximalism, brother.
There it is. We're gonna keep this running for a minute or two.
Build whatever.
Build whatever, dude. You can build anything.
My goodness. Look at this. The vibes are up. Moderator was great. Thanks, everyone. It was an interesting experience. What a great vibe. What were your key takeaways?
I mean, there was a few light bulb moments in there. One of them was opt-in sovereignty, which I'll hit on for a moment, which is that, like, the ability for rollups to opt into sovereignty and basically move like fluidly in and out of it was just like very eye-opening, because it's not only like you have to, we started on kind of like this exercise of like constructing our own rollup. Yeah. And it's not like if you construct your own rollup and you plug in these certain pieces, in the old way, in the modular, in the monolithic way, it was like you built it and it was immutable and you couldn't change it. Now we have like these modular pieces and you can go in and out. You can plug in pieces and then you can take it out if it's not fit in your use case. You can plug something else in and you can move around in these different, just in the modular space, you can just move around and interact and just bump into these different tools and these different communities. And it's just very, very cool to see the adaptability of these communities and the applications. And it makes me very bullish.
Dude, I mean, my convictions in the market are just consistently boosted by live streams and by podcasts and by conversations with GigaBrains. It's actually an investing hack. I think one of my big takeaways based on what you're saying is like RAS providers like this, like build your rollups build your modular blockchains with like 5 clicks in less than 5 minutes that's just a crazy idea. So like Gelato, Caldera, Conduit, Altlayer, and the rest, like being able to bring those pieces of infrastructure together, man, that's wild. The other thing that stood out to me in the value accrual thought is that one of the biggest problems with crypto companies and projects for the last 5 years has been the lack of profitability due to piss poor revenue models, no demand, and people overall not using products. But if we can create modular rollups, something that is very exciting to somebody that is built upon Fuel, Celestia, and Ethereum settlement, or use Union for interop and Espresso for shared sequencing, or however you want to build it, all of a sudden, if there's a couple of hits, like a game that goes viral or an application that is a hit, dude, all of those parts of that stack are going to be repriced upwards. And so like the goal for these, I feel like the goal for these is like to get into as many RAS providers and to as many modular builders as possible, and just almost like hope that you get some hits on your modular rollup. Because if you are the DA provider for this game that has 10 million daily active users, brother, the amount of data that you're going to be processing is just going to be insane. So I'm quite interested to see how these modular rollups built on these different stacks actually accrue that value. And then of course, where it comes to the users, like for us, like where do we get the reciprocal?
Exactly. And I think it starts and ends with the users. And then it goes in, it hits all of these toolings and all of these layers and parts. But again, I think what you're saying about a game that has 10 million daily active users, it starts with getting those users, and then it's a chicken and an egg. Like the users are going to come if like the experience is there.
If the stack is good, exactly. It's a flywheel. It's a cycle. Yeah. It's a self-reinforcing prophecy, and we're getting there in terms of the technology. Another thing that I liked was that none of these guys were super none of them were super like fierce and competitive, or like, oh, my stack's better than your stack. I think the modular mindset, modular mindset, that's a brand. I think the modular mindset is actually of like pure open-mindedness and acceptance and optionality, and understanding that sure, your VM is better than this person's or this project's VM for this use case, but they might oust you in that use case. And like, okay, like building on WASM may not be as good as building on Rust for these reasons, but for blockchains that have this use case, actually Rust is better or WASM's better. And so like, I think a lot of these teams, rather than like, because like all the monolithic L1s, they all have to fight with each other because it's all a race to the bottom on speed and on cost. Nobody gives a fuck about security. It's speed and cost. Whereas these guys, these stack builders, like, yo, like maybe ours isn't the best for everything, but we are specialized for some things. And so we respect other projects because they're good, and we can actually lift them up for the education of everybody, thus providing a better space for the whole entire the entire crypto ecosystem.
For all of the users. That's the energy right there. And you're totally right about like the alt1 thesis is dead. It's like not just the alt1 thesis is dead, but like potentially the Ethereum. Ethereum,
dude, it's crazy.
Unstoppable. But what you're saying, I totally
crypto money. It's not going anywhere. There's going to be an Ethereum ETF, the monolithic chain thesis is dead.
The monolithic chain thesis is dead. So Ethereum is going to have to adapt or die. But there's plenty of room for Ethereum to adapt into the modular space. And on the modular mindset, I love that the message there too. Is it does seem that, the mindset here is not competitive, like you're saying, and I think that aligns with our thesis on competition, which is that this space is infinite. And it feels like, sometimes when the space gets crowded, it starts to feel like it's finite. But ultimately, in the modular space, it does really feel like this, like there's an infinite realm of opportunities for builders to build. And
I love that. Modular, abundant, monolithic, scarce, modular, infinite, monolithic, finite.
Exactly. And it breaks a lot of the mental models that were starting to become kind of like old and janky. Like the fat protocol, fat application thesis, dead. The alt the alt layer 1 thesis, dead. Like and it's like no shame against the alt layer 1s. Like there was a time and a place. And the same thing for like I was a big believer. At times I was a big believer in fat application. At other times I was a big believer in fat protocol. And it's like those ideas or like those perspectives had a time and a place. But with new information, it becomes so important to adapt, because if you don't, like, the world continues to move on and it'll leave you behind. So you gotta adapt or you're gonna die. So
Yeah.
It's super important for it's really cool to see some of the projects that we had on the stream today, like, push forward. And I do hope, like, some of the projects that have done really, really great work up until now adapt and absorb a lot of the information and alpha that's being shared by these modular teams.
The alpha is, they're all tokenless. And all you got to do, guys, is, like, except for Celestia, all you got to do is pay attention to which modular rollups are being built with which stacks. And then you just got to use those rollups. Like, it's that easy, guys. So, like, Eigenlayer does not have a coin. They are integrating with somebody. Eclipse doesn't have a coin. Use Eclipse. Risk Zero doesn't have a coin, but they are using Eclipse. Eclipse is using Risk Zero for fraud proofs. Guys, like it's any modular rollup that is being built with a alternative VM that was up here today, except for maybe Fuel has a coin, but I don't think they do. Maybe they do. Any modular rollup, DA or interrupt layer, you just use it in the modular world, damn. Guaranteed tokenless retroactive rewards, baby. Much love. Should I buy more wolf in a hat? I don't think so. I think you should actually buy more modular coins. What timelines do you guys think scalable, secure ZK rollups are shipped that can do thousands or more TPS? Yeah, so I just wrote a post about this today with regards to ZK Sync's Boojum upgrade. I think that was an interesting one. But I would say, I'd say 2 years. I'd say 2 years. I'd say we were 4 years or 5 years ago in last cycle. I say we're 2 years out from that, maybe 3. And I think why? It's because modular. I think once we get this modular stack design down, then what we can do is we can have ZK-based VMs, right? We have a ZK-based virtual machine, like using ZK WASM, like Fluent or a different one, and that'll allow the ZK rollups to ship at that much TPS away from EVM. And I think EVM ZK rollups will ship as well, but I think some of these non-EVM stacks will actually end up shipping well. Stake TIA. TIA is modular money. Now that the panel's done, we can say whatever we want. We don't have to talk about prices or anything, but all I can say is retroactive rewards for stake TIA. I mean, Dimension tweeted today a freaking camera, brother. Yep.
Wait,
so that means that they took like a snapshot. That means Dimension took a snapshot, and I bet your ass they're copying Celestia, because everybody wants to be like Celestia. So what do? You just stake TIA. Why? Because you want the TIA community to be a part of your community, because they're big, they're savages. So what do? You just airdrop to them. So that makes TIA modular money.
An ecosystem or several competent teams behind it. I mean, I think the panel today speaks for itself.
Yeah, I think so.
Subscribe wars.
The boys.
Subscribe wars.
Yeah, exactly. The panel speaks for itself.
There's enough said.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Andy.
Peace.
See ya.